Los Angeles, 2025. A city that never sleeps, where dreams collide with reality under a blanket of neon and noise. It's a late Friday night, and the streets are alive, horns blaring, bass thumping from hidden clubs, the air electric with possibility. Behind the wheel of a gleaming white Tesla, Julian Voss cuts through the chaos. At 38, he's the CEO of Voss Media, a documentary film empire known for gritty, award-winning stories. Dark brown hair swept back, piercing blue eyes scanning the road. He's the picture of power, wrapped in a crisp gray suit. But beneath that polished surface, there's a void. To Julian, love's a distraction, a luxury he's never had time for in a life ruled by ambition. Today's been a grind, hours locked in boardrooms, debating a new film project. A deep dive into LA's underground art scene have left Julian restless. He could head to his penthouse, a sterile glass perch overlooking the city, but the thought of its silence feels suffocating. So he drives, letting the hum of the Tesla guide him through the night. His route takes him to Pasadena, a quirky pocket of the city where artists thrive, amid graffiti-covered walls and tucked-away galleries. The streets here pulse with a different rhythm, raw and unscripted. His headlights catch a flickering neon sign, Neon Vault. It's an underground art spot, a secret haven for creatives who shun the mainstream. Julian pulls over, curiosity tugging at him. He steps out, slinging his suit jacket over his shoulder, his polished shoes clicking against the cracked pavement. The air smells faintly of spray paint as he pushes through a heavy door into a dimly lit world. Inside, the gallery buzzes with a small but vibrant crowd. Punk kids with dyed hair, leather-clad rebels, artists nursing cheap beers. Glowing paintings line the walls, their colors shifting under black lights. It's chaotic, alive, nothing like the pristine sets he's used to filming. And then he sees her. Riley Harper, 25, stands in the center of it all, a figure of defiance and grace. Her ombre purple hair cascades over her shoulders, catching the light like a prism, vibrant yet soft. A natural hue she's made her own. Her gray eyes, sharp and soulful, flicker with focus as she manipulates a tangle of LED lights. She's not just an artist, she's a magician, weaving beams of crimson, teal, and violet into mid-air sculptures. Stories of freedom and rebellion told without words. Her hands move with precision, her slim frame swaying slightly in a black tank top and ripped jeans, boots scuffing the worn floor. Julian stops dead, hands sliding into his pockets, his breath catching. He's seen art before, hell. He's documented it, but this is alive. Riley commands the space, the lights bending to her will, each flicker a pulse of her spirit. His heart kicks harder, an unfamiliar thrill racing through him. He's transfixed, a man who spent years chasing stories now caught in one he didn't expect. The crowd erupts as her performance ends, a burst of applause filling the room. But Julian doesn't clap, he just watches, blue eyes locked on her, a predator sizing up something rare. Riley steps down, brushing purple strands from her face, her boots thudding softly. She's barely caught her breath when a group of drunks stumbles toward her, loud, sloppy, reeking of beer. "Hey, purple chick, do it again!" One slurs, his hand reaching for her arm. She pulls back, gray eyes narrowing. "Get lost!" she snaps, voice low but edged with steel. They laugh, undeterred, and one snatches the bag slung over her shoulder, her light gear clattering inside. Julian's not the hero type. He doesn't meddle in messes that aren't his. But something in Riley's stance, the way she stands tall despite the odds, the flicker of old scars in her glare stirs him. He steps forward, his presence cutting through the noise like a blade. "That's enough," he says, his deep voice calm but lethal, blue eyes boring into them. The drunks falter, sizing him up, his height, his tailored suit, the quiet menace in his stare. They mutter curses, drop the bag, and slink off, tails between their legs. Riley turns, her gaze locking with his. He's a head taller, his woody cologne cutting through the gallery's haze, and for a split second, she's thrown. "I didn't need saving," she says, her tone sharp but tinged with something softer, curiosity maybe. Julian smirks, a cocky tilt to his lips. "Call it boredom. What's next, gratitude or another dirty look?" She studies him, then shrugs, a faint smirk of her own breaking through. "Fine, one drink to square it." They move to a rickety bar in the corner, red wine poured into scratched glasses. "You don't fit here," Riley says, eyeing his suit, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. Julian chuckles, low and smooth. "And you don't strike me as the type who shares drinks with strangers. What's your deal? Roaming the city, chasing lights?" Her guard flickers just for a moment before she leans back with a dry laugh. "Better than being trapped in a golden cage like you. Voss Media, right? I've heard of you." He raises an eyebrow, impressed but cool. "Then you know I could hand you the world if you asked." She shakes her head, purple hair swaying. "I don't want your world. I want my freedom." The words hang between them, a challenge wrapped in truth. Under the gallery's shifting lights, the tension shifts too, less a standoff, more a pull. Outside, LA glitters on, oblivious. But inside the neon vault, two strangers, Julian Voss and Riley Harper, stand on the edge of something neither can name. A spark igniting in the dark. The air in the gallery buzzed with a restless hum as Julian Voss and Riley Harper lingered at the bar, their conversation a tightrope of wit and wariness. Riley leaned against the counter, her purple hair glowing faintly under a stray LED beam, her gray eyes daring him to keep up. Julian, glass in hand, met her gaze with a steady intensity, his blue eyes cool but alive with something new. The crowd around them thinned, the night stretching late, when a low rumble shook the windows. "Rain. Looks like you're stuck with me," Riley said, a smirk tugging at her lips as rain streaked the glass. Julian tilted his head, unfazed. "I could drive you home." Her laugh was instant, sharp-edged. "Home? I don't do home like you mean it. But if you're not scared of getting wet, follow me." She didn't wait for an answer. Grabbing her gear bag, she slipped out a side door into the storm, tossing him a glance that was half dare, half invitation. Julian's pulse quickened. He wasn't a man who chased people, chased him, but Riley? She was a current pulling him under. He dropped cash on the bar and followed, stepping into the downpour. Rain plastered his suit to his skin as he trailed her down a narrow alley, her boots splashing ahead. She stopped at a rusted door, an old winery basement tucked behind Pasadena's art strip. She shoved it open, the creak echoing, and waved him in. "Don't just stand there," she called, disappearing inside. He stepped into a damp, cavernous space, the air thick with the ghosts of aged wine barrels. But Riley had claimed it. Strings of LEDs dangled from the ceiling, bathing the room in blues, oranges, and purples, a chaotic starfield of her own making. Glowing canvases lined the walls, half-finished light designs scrawled across them. A mattress sat in one corner, tangled with wires and tools, a makeshift throne in her rebel kingdom. "This is my spot," she said, kicking off her soaked boots. She flicked on a teal light strip, its glow sharpening her features. "Temporary, but mine." Julian's eyes roamed the chaos, then settled on her. "You live like this?" he asked, his voice quiet, not judging, just trying to understand. She tossed her bag down, shrugging. "It's freedom. No rent, no chains, just me and my work." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his dark hair, his suit a stark contrast to her raw world. "You're nothing like anyone I've met," he said, almost to himself, the words rough with honesty. Riley's smirk softened, her gray eyes searching his. "You're not exactly typical either, Mr. CEO." The space between them shrank, the air thickening with unspoken heat. She took a step, then another, until she was close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him. Her fingers brushed his wet tie, hesitated, then yanked him into a kiss, sudden, fierce, a spark igniting a blaze. Julian didn't flinch. His hands found her waist, pulling her against him, the kiss deepening with the taste of rain and wine. The storm outside roared, but it was nothing compared to the tempest they unleashed. Her gear bag hit the floor, forgotten, as they stumbled toward the mattress. Clothes peeled away in a rush, his jacket, her tank top, a trail of wet fabric across the concrete. The LEDs painted their skin in shifting colors, blue on her shoulders, purple across his chest, as they collided in a frenzy of need. Riley's nails dug into his back, her breath ragged, and Julian lost himself in her wildness, her energy a drug he couldn't resist. But then, in the heat of it, he felt it. A slight tremble, a hesitation in her rhythm. He slowed, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes. Her gray gaze flickered, unguarded for a heartbeat, and it hit him. She'd never been here before. "You're—" he started, voice gravelly, caught between awe and disbelief. Riley's expression hardened, but a flush crept up her neck. "Don't make it weird," she muttered, tugging him back. He didn't argue, letting the fire take over again, but that revelation cracked something open in him. A raw, possessive pull he hadn't known he could feel. She wasn't just a fling, not anymore. They surrendered to the night, bodies tangled in the flickering glow, passion drowning out the storm until exhaustion dragged them under. Dawn broke, gray light seeping through cracked windows above the basement. Julian stirred, the mattress creaking under him, and reached for Riley. His hand found nothing but cold air. He bolted upright, scanning the room. She was gone. No trace except a tiny purple LED light, blinking faintly on the pillow where she'd lain. He snatched it up, fingers closing tight around it, his jaw clenching. The silence pressed in, her absence a knife twisting in his chest. She'd run. He stood, still in yesterday's rumpled shirt, and stepped into the damp morning air. Rainwater pooled in the alley as he stared at the light in his palm. His blue eyes darkened, a slow, steely smirk curling his lips. "You can run, Riley Harper," he murmured to the empty street. "But I'm coming for you." That night hadn't just happened. It had changed him. And Julian Voss didn't let go of what mattered. Julian Voss drove back to Voss Media's towering headquarters in downtown LA, the tiny purple LED light burning a hole in his pocket. Riley Harper's absence clung to him like the dampness of his suit, a persistent, unshakable weight. At 38, he'd mastered control, turning Voss Media into a juggernaut with cold calculation. Relationships? He'd had them brief, transactional, forgettable. But Riley had slipped through his fingers, and that wasn't something he could let stand. One night with her had flipped a switch he didn't know he had. He stormed into his office, a stark cathedral of glass and steel. The black marble desk gleamed under recessed lights, floor-to-ceiling windows framing LA's sprawling skyline skyscrapers, piercing a hazy sky, traffic crawling below. He tossed his soaked jacket onto a leather chair and dropped into his seat, powering up his computer with a flick of his wrist. The purple light hit the desk with a soft clink, its faint blink mocking him. He stared at it, jaw tight, then slammed the intercom button. "Get the analytics team up here," he ordered, voice low and clipped. The glass door hissed open minutes later, 5 of his sharpest techs filing in hoodies, laptops, eyes darting nervously. Julian Voss was a legend, but today he was a storm. His blue eyes blazed as he leaned forward, hands braced on the desk. "I need you to find someone," he said, each word deliberate. Riley Harper, 25, purple ombre hair, natural shade, gray eyes, slim but strong. She's an artist, works with lights, pulls security feeds, scours social media, whatever it takes. I want her whereabouts in 24 hours. A wiry kid with glasses, Ethan, the youngest, shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Voss? That's broad. Any specifics? Social handles? A last known spot?" Julian's gaze sliced through him, cold as ice. "Find her," he snapped. "Run facial recognition. Tap into street cams if you have to. I don't care how. Just get it done." The team nodded, swallowing questions, and scrambled out. Julian turned to the window, the city stretching beneath him. He saw her in his mind, those fluid moves under the lights, that untamed fire, and it clawed at him. Why her? Why now? 30 miles away, Riley Harper sat in a run-down motel on LA's edge, the kind of place where the walls sagged with age and despair. Yellow paint peeled in strips, the bed creaked under a threadbare sheet, and a neon sign outside buzzed red, casting a ghostly glow over her purple hair. She hunched over a tangle of wires and LEDs, tools scattered around her, earbuds blasting a thumping beat. But her gray eyes were unfocused, lost in a haze of regret. Julian Voss. His name echoed in her skull, tied to the memory of his hands on her, his breath against her skin. "Idiot," she muttered, slamming a screwdriver down. "What were you thinking?" For 10 years, she'd lived untethered. At 13, her parents, desperate and broke, had sold her to a commercial art outfit called Apex Arts. She'd spent years designing light shows for their profit collapsing under the weight of their demands until she'd bolted at 17, swearing no one would cage her again. Julian, with his penthouse life and commanding stare, was the kind of man she'd vowed to avoid a walking trap. But that night in the basement had shaken her walls, his touch a heat she couldn't unfeel. She hated it, hated him for it. He tracked her down that night. The Outer Glow Festival sprawled across an industrial lot outside LA, a riot of light and sound, stages glowing against the dark, crowds pulsing with energy. Riley stood on a rickety platform, her hands weaving crimson and teal beams into a breathtaking dance of color. Her purple hair whipped in the breeze, her gray eyes fierce with focus. She was a supernova, untouchable until Julian Voss pushed through the chaos. He stood out, black shirt, no tie, his presence slicing through ravers with neon paint and pierced faces. He didn't care about the stares. He only saw her. Her set ended, the crowd roaring as she bowed slightly, purple strands falling over her face. She grabbed her bag and darted off stage, boots thudding, but Julian was faster. He cut through the mob, blocking her path in a shadowed corner. "Riley?" he said, his voice deep, steady, a claim wrapped in sound. She froze, gray eyes flashing with exhaustion and defiance. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her steel. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. "You ran," he said, quieter now, raw. "I need to know why. One night with you is stuck with me." She scoffed, turning her head, hair spilling over her shoulder. "I'm not yours, Julian Voss. Stop wasting your time." But he caught her wrist, not rough, just firm, holding her there, their eyes locked, the air crackling. "You woke something in me," he said, voice husky, unguarded. Then he kissed her, hard, desperate, a collision of everything he couldn't say. For a moment she melted into it, fingers clutching his shirt, her breath hitching. But fear surged, cold and sharp. She shoved him back, eyes wide. "Don't," she whispered, voice breaking, before spinning away, disappearing into the festival's dark maze. Julian stood there, chest heaving, the echo of her touch tingling on his skin. A slow smile spread across his face, not smug, but resolute. She could run all she wanted. He'd find her again. The bold chase had begun. Julian Voss returned to Voss Media the next day, Riley Harper's kiss a phantom on his lips. She'd run again, but that moment her grip on his shirt, the heat of her, had sealed her fate in his mind. At 38, he'd never chased anyone. People bent to him, partners, rivals, fleeting lovers. But Riley was a wildfire, slipping through his grasp, and he couldn't let her go. Back in his office, the city sprawled beyond the glass walls, a glittering prize he'd conquered. The purple LED light sat on his desk, blinking like a heartbeat. He needed her not just to find her, but to keep her. He hit the intercom again, his voice a blade. "Cancel her bookings," he ordered. "Every gig, every show, buy the venues, shut them down, whatever it takes. She's not slipping away." His team hesitated. What kind of CEO micromanaged an artist's schedule? But they obeyed. Julian didn't blink at the ethics. He'd built Voss Media by rewriting rules, and Riley Harper would face him whether she liked it or not. Days later, Riley felt the noose tighten. In her motel room, her phone lit up with alerts, cancellations piling in like bricks, small galleries, pop-up light shows, all gone. No, she breathed, hurling a light strip against the wall. It sparked and died, a mirror to her rising panic. She knew who did this. Julian Voss. His name was a curse on her tongue, tangled with a shiver she couldn't suppress. 10 years free since Apex Arts had chewed her up and spit her out at 17, and now he was boxing her in. She hated how part of her wanted to see him again, to feel that pull. That night, a black SUV rolled up outside the motel, tires crunching gravel. 3 men in tailored suits stepped out, calm but immovable. "Miss Harper," one said, voice flat. "Mr. Voss requests your presence. Come with us." Riley's gray eyes blazed. "I'm not his puppet," she snapped, clutching her bag like a shield. But they didn't flinch, ushering her into the car with quiet insistence. She didn't fight, not yet. The city blurred past tinted windows, the SUV climbing into Hollywood Hills, to a penthouse that gleamed like a star above LA. The elevator opened to a sleek oasis, polished hardwood, sparse furniture, glass walls framing the city's endless lights. Julian stood by the window, sleeves rolled up on a black shirt, his blue eyes locking onto her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Riley," he said, voice rough, stepping closer. She squared her shoulders, defiance masking her racing pulse. "What is this, Julian?" she demanded. "Canceling my life? Dragging me here? You think you can own me?" He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his gaze unwavering. "I don't want you running," he said, softer but firm. "I tried letting you go, but you're in my head every moment since that night." She laughed, sharp and hollow, turning away. "You're insane. I don't belong to anyone." But Julian moved closer, and then, to her shock, he sank to one knee, blue eyes piercing hers. Riley's breath hitched, gray eyes widening. He reached for her hand, his touch warm against her cold fingers. "I'm not here to cage you," he said, voice steady, thumb tracing her skin. "I want you to be my wife. Let me build a life where you're free on your terms." The air stilled. Julian Voss, untouchable, unbreakable, kneeling before her. It was surreal, a crack in his armor she hadn't expected. But she pulled her hand free, shaking her head. "No," she said, voice trembling. "You're just like the rest, control, dressed up as promises. I need my freedom." She turned to the elevator, but Julian stood, catching her shoulders gently. "I won't force you," he said, raw and strained. "But I'll prove I'm not them." His phone buzzed, cutting the silence. He glanced at it, his face darkening. "What?" Riley asked, dread creeping in. He hesitated, then handed it over. The screen glowed. Her family's found her, demanding she return to Apex Arts to pay off debts. Riley's blood ran cold, her knees buckling. "They can't," she whispered, backing up. Julian steadied her, his grip firm. "They have," he said, voice grave. "They've contacted my team, want you back in their grip." Flashbacks hit her, endless nights at Apex, her parents' cold demands when she faltered. "I won't go," she choked out, tears burning her eyes. Julian's jaw tightened. "They won't get near you," he swore, his hands anchoring her. "I'll make sure of it." The next day her parents marched into Voss Media, haggard, greedy, flanked by sleazy lawyers. They faced Julian in a stark conference room, their voices shrill. "She's ours," her father spat. "She owes us for raising her, feeding her talent." Julian's laugh was icy, lethal. "She owes you nothing," he said, sliding a thick folder across the table, proof of their exploitation, shady contracts from her childhood. "One call to the press, and you're finished." Their faces drained of color, and they fled, tails tucked. Riley watched from the shadows, gray eyes swirling with emotion. Julian turned to her, brushing her cheek. "I did it for you," he said softly. "I can't lose you." She saw it then, not a captor but a protector. That night on the penthouse roof under a web of purple lights he'd rigged for her. He knelt again. "I love you, Riley," he said, voice breaking with truth. Her heart hammered. She fought at freedom versus him, but his eyes held her. "I love you too," she whispered, nodding yes, tears spilling as he pulled her into his arms. The abandoned theater hummed with quiet magic as Julian Voss and Riley Harper stood beneath their handmade canopy of lights. They'd claimed it for their wedding, a raw, unpolished space turned sacred by their hands. Riley's black gown shimmered with glowing threads, her purple hair free and wild. Julian, in a simple black suit, gazed at her like she was the only thing in the world. "You're everything," he murmured, brushing her cheek before the ceremony. She grinned, teasing. "Couldn't wait till the vows, huh?" He smirked. "Not a chance." No crowds, no flash, just a handful of artists who'd walked Riley's path, witnesses to their bond. Their vows cut through the stillness. "Riley," Julian said, voice deep and sure, "you lit up my life when I didn't know I needed it. I'll love you, shield you, always." Her gray eyes glistened. "Julian, you're my home, something I never thought I'd have. I'm yours forever." Silver rings slid onto their fingers and their kiss ignited the room, the lights pulsing brighter as if celebrating with them. That night, in a loft above the theater strung with violet LEDs, they fell into each other, no rush, just devotion. "My wife," Julian whispered against her skin, hands tracing her spine. Riley smiled, her arms around his neck. "My husband," she breathed, surrendering to a love she'd once feared. They drifted off under the glow, tangled in silk sheets and promises. Morning broke softly, sunlight filtering through dusty windows. Riley slept against Julian's chest, her purple hair fanned out, peaceful. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, shattering the calm. He grabbed it, eyes narrowing at the message. "Apex Arts has a file on Riley threatening exposure unless you deliver her. 24 hours. He tensed, easing out of bed to not wake her, but Riley stirred, gray eyes blinking open. "What's going on?" she asked, voice groggy. He handed her the phone, jaw tight. Her face paled as she read accusations of sabotage from her Apex days, a fabricated lie to destroy Voss Media. "They can't do this," she whispered, the phone slipping from her hands. Julian knelt beside her, cupping her face. "They won't," he said, fierce. "It's a bluff." "I know you're innocent," she swallowed hard. "I saw their corruption, money stolen from artists, fake deals. I never said a word, but they're terrified I will now." His blue eyes darkened with fury. "They think I'll trade you to save my company? They're dead wrong." Apex moved fast. By noon, a press release dropped. Voss Media shields a rogue artist linked to Apex Arts' ruin. Stocks plummeted 25% in an hour. Julian turned the theater into a command center, techs and lawyers swarming in. Riley paced beside him, dread twisting her gut, as Apex's CEO, Victor Kane, a slick, silver-hailed vulture, went live on every screen. "Julian Voss harbors a traitor," he sneered, waving forged paper. "Riley Harper tanked Apex Arts and he's covering it up. Hand her over or Voss Media's done." Riley's knees buckled. The media cameras. Lies had haunted her since Apex shoved her into the spotlight as a kid. "I did this," she whispered, tears falling. Julian dropped to her side, lifting her chin. "No, they did." "I'm with you." She met his gaze, resolve sparking. "They want me scared. I'm done running. Let's fight." He hesitated, hating the risk, but nodded. "Together." "Hack their stream," Julian told Ryan, his tech lead. Riley leaned in. "Try Apex Light 99, their old password." Ryan typed, and seconds later they breached Apex's feed. Victor's face vanished, replaced by Riley under the theater's lights. Her voice shook, then steadied. "I'm Riley Harper. Apex Arts exploited me at 13. Stole from artists, hid the truth. Voss Media gave me a chance. Here's what they did. The team unleashed it. Emails, bank records, Apex's sins laid bare. The press flipped. Victor's shouts crackled before his feed died. Apex stocks crashing to nothing. Voss Media soared, vindicated. Riley collapsed into Julian's arms, trembling. "You didn't have to," he murmured, burying his face in her hair. She smiled through tears. "I did. For us." Years later, they lived in a sleek home outside Riley's light studio downstairs, Julian's editing suite above. Their son, Levi, 6, with gray eyes and a quiet spark, danced on their rooftop terrace, a mini LED baton in hand. One night, under Riley's glowing designs, they joined him, Julian syncing a beat, Riley weaving lights, Levi giggling between them. The city shimmered below, a testament to their fight. Julian pulled Riley close, whispering, "You're my forever." She pressed her hand to his heart. "And you're mine." Levi tugged their hands, and under those lights their family burned, bright, unbreakable, eternal.